everyone. Thanks for your coming and your serious interest to see and to listen our colleagues from Oslo University College of Applied Sciences and basically today I have the pleasure to welcome Professor Einara Överbye from Oslo University. Professor Einara interested in social policy and his aim today is to introduce or to show us some mysteries of child protection system in Norway, because I think that in Czech Republic is very controversial thing or topic, mainly thanks to media reactions, and probably we will discuss about it. The reaction of our politicians and especially Czech president to criticize the child protection of Norway, because it's very, in particular, it's very funny because our president basically declared the war against the Norway thanks to some kind of system of child protection in Norway. So, if I can ask you to introduce the topic.
Thank you, Thomas. Very nice to be here. And when Thomas asked me to talk, basically the context is that my colleague Paul Weiden coming here to talk about the theory of suicide of Emil Durkheim and Masaryk. Masaryk apparently wrote his theory of suicide a few years before Durkheim, and Durkheim refers to Masaryk. So that will be tomorrow. But I came along too because we are having talks about possible student exchanges and research cooperation. And I also said to Thomas, I've been working on social policy since 1982. So, instead of me coming to the Czech Republic and holding a talk about something, and you might just, politely entertained about this, you're not really interested, perhaps there is some aspect of Norwegian social policy that really might interest a Czech audience. And then Thomas said, well, I think maybe child protection in Norway is a theme that has some interest in Czech Republic these days. So perhaps you can talk about that. And I said, yeah, sure, why not? Yeah, I'll talk about that. Can do that. And then I went on the internet and Googled Czech and Barnevernet, which is our title of our child protection agency. And I got quite a lot of information. And I understood that there was certainly quite a lot of interest in the Czech Republic about Norwegian child protection. So I thought, this is great, there might be actually be an audience here. And I'm glad you came, and I'll try to take you into the issues of child protection policy in Norway. My hunch, my sort of initial hunch, is that the principles of child protection is probably rather similar to the Czech Republic. But that's an empirical question. And I would be sort of interested also in the research cooperation way about, comparing what is similar, what is different in the Czech and the Norwegian approach to child protection. But my initial hunch is that, the principles are rather similar. But there might be some differences in the implementation. And that's also interesting. Of course, in the end, policy is about implementation. So we'll see. We'll see if that's true or not. I don't know if it's true. Anyway, I'll take you through also a little bit of the history of our child protection policies, and I'll make some brief European comparisons because, it's sort of a general tendency, I believe, at least in European countries, perhaps in the world, when it comes to child protection. But it might be that there's something about whether or not we are dealing with a similar type of movement across countries as well. So that's also an interesting topic to discuss, the history of child protection in the Czech Republic and in Norway. Your president, Markus Zeman, has made a high-profile statement, which is also made in use in Norway, that that the Child Protection Agency is really a labelist-born organization. It's a little bit unclear what he means by that. I don't think he elaborated. He might have meant, but probably not, the same as a Lithuanian resident living in a small city in Norway, who argued that there is a secret agenda where we really are out to steal the children of foreigners and raise them with us, sort of prevent them from ever leaving the country again in order to improve the genetic pool of Norwegians. That is sort of a policy we have adopted in secret, and that, you know, all over 3,500 social workers are in on this conspiracy, and no one had leaked this secret directive to any journalists. And, you know, so I guess that it's a conspiracy that must encompass perhaps the whole Norwegian population, at least, you know, the thousands of people working not only in the Child Protection Agency but also in our healthcare system and so on. Lots of this, I will see if I can convince you that perhaps this is mistaken. Put it that way. Let me use mild words here. Lots of this also relates to a very specific case of a Czech woman living in Norway and her 2 children. I won't comment particularly on that case, and this is partly because I and no one else knows have information about this. This information is confidential, and it's confidential for several reasons. I'll come back to that, why we have confidentiality. But also, my assumption is that there are the same confidentiality rules in the Czech Republic. Basically, this information is not made public by public authorities unless it's both parents agree that it's made public. Both parents must agree that it can be made public. And also, if the children are so young that they cannot give them consent themselves, and they must be at least 15 in order to give the consent themselves, because they are also part of the case, right? If they are younger than that, then the Norwegian government will not disclose information unless that is considered in the best interest of the child. And normally, the thinking in Norway is that it is not the best interest of the child that information about their case, these papers, often very sensitive information, is made public on the internet. Because, you know, once things are on the internet, they are there forever. Which means that when the children grow up and Google themselves, they will necessarily see these files. Their friends will see them. Their future girlfriends or boyfriends will see them. Their future employers will see them when they Google their names. That's why we are very restrictive, and as a general rule thinks that it is not in the best interest of the children that these confidential, this often very sensitive information is made public. And therefore also I won't comment in particular on this case. Although when I go through, if you know the case, when I go through the slides and the information, you will see that indirectly I will touch upon several of the issues that have been with the media in the Czech Republic, and indirectly I will answer some of these accusations that also some of the bloggers have put up, at least the bloggers I'm able to read, right? And we can have a debate about that. Thomas said that a student asked if we could tape this the whole seance, and I said that's fine with me. And you can also get the PowerPoints afterwards. I'll send the version to Milos. So there's some numbers here also that you might be interested in, and I'll give you that as well. If you take this kind of thing, well, generally speaking, if you refer to anything I'm saying in blogs or in the Czech media, you're of course totally free to do that. I just ask you to do the same thing. I would recommend, generally speaking, in all these kind of cases, because there are lots of cases like this, quite a lot of them, and the bloggers are out there with the best of intentions. But be very careful if you want to put in the names of the children if you write blogs about this, because again, these children will then the girlfriends and boyfriends and employers Google their names in the future, for the rest of their lives, they will see your blogs, among other things. So, you know, we should all be a bit careful in the best interest of the child. Okay, that's sort of for introduction. And also say, you know, I'm going through this kind of thing. I think the room is reserved for 2 hours. I've said I'll just talk for 45 minutes. I can already feel that my introduction is a little bit long, but we'll see, you know. If there are questions for clarification, think you say that you don't understand what Einara is saying here, then please stop me and I'll elaborate. But if you want to discuss, also discuss ready to check the check policy and discuss, you know, the rationality or not of Norwegian politics, let's wait with that little discussion, right? But if there are questions about things you don't get, it's puzzling you, then please stop me and I'll elaborate and make it and clarify whatever is unclear. Okay? Yeah. It's fine with you? Yeah. Good. Right. I will never talk the autonomy of the child and the paternalism of the state. And I will go into that as I go along, what I mean by those two things. But as a starting point, I believe there is sort of a connection here between a tendency in Norway, but seems to be a tendency in many countries, perhaps in all countries, towards emphasizing the autonomy of the individual, strengthening of the individual. And since I know most of you, perhaps all of you are sociology students, you are probably aware of this very old thesis that it is an individuation process is part of the modernization, or eventually post-modernization. Ulrich Beck, Anthony Giddens, actually the thought goes back to Durkheim, you know, making a link to at least to Durkheim. And also the attempt to empirically study if this is really taking place also goes back to Durkheim. There's an individuation process. And part of this individuation process is sort of opening up the family to see its individual members. The approach of the family is sort of a closed system. What goes on there is private. This is sort of the modern, traditional old perception of social construction, if you want, of the family. There is sort of, it seems to be an opening towards a new social construction of family, towards focusing on the individuals in the family. This, first of all, took place through the feminist movement and the laws against domestic violence, in particular domestic violence against women. Tennessee in the United States was actually the first country in the world, or state in the world, who put in actually a law against domestic violence against women. It became against the law to beat your wife. That was in 1878, I believe. At least it was the 1870s. By 1920, all US states had put in place legislation stating that it was illegal. Domestic violence against women was illegal. Which in a sense is the beginning of opening up the family and actually protecting one family member against potential violence from another family member. Okay? This has been, so Tennessee was the first who did this. And then a later stage, Sweden in 1965 made rape of the woman something that could be pursued legally also within a marriage. Until then, it was considered that rape could not take place inside a marriage because they were married, right? So anything inside a marriage. And that idea also has spread. The idea that it's illegal to physically beat your wife or your spouse. The laws now are gender neutral, but in practice it tends to be male-female issue. But there are now 102 countries in the world that has laws against marital rape rape inside the family. And 52 of these states has explicitly outlawed marital rape in the criminal code. So it might seem to be sort of a diffusion process, if you know the old classic theories about evidentologists, for instance, that some countries act as innovators in this concept, and then you have early adapters, mainstream adapters, and late adapters. So this is, the autonomy of the wife and the paternalism of the state. Why paternalism of the state? Because who enforces the laws? It's the state, right? So once you give the state the authority to protect the autonomy of some family members against possible violence from others, you actually then introduce the state as a paternalist, as an alternative paternalist, as a benevolent paternalist, who is protecting potentially weak members of a family against potential abuse from other family members. And then you'll probably see where I'm going with this, right? Because there is not only two grown-ups in a family, there are also some who are not grown up at all. And then comes the focus on protecting also the child as an individual against potential abuse by other family members. Actually, this first happened not in the family but in the schools. Going back, in the old days, most countries, I guess all of them, had rules of corporal punishment of children as part of the education that took place in schools, right? It was violence as an educational tool, upbringing. The teacher could, spank and humiliate children as part, as a pedagogic instrument. The first country that outlawed corporal punishment in schools was actually Poland. And it happened already in 1783, before the French Revolution. Allegedly inspired by John Stuart Mill, but it did it way before Britain did. By now, there are 117 countries who outlaw corporal punishment of children in schools. There are 195 member states in the United Nations, so there are quite a lot of countries that still allow it. But again, it seems to be some kind of process, and I'm not aware of a single country that has gone back. Once you introduce laws here, you don't go back again. So it seems to be a one-way tendency. If this is total diffusion, then we'll get to 195 countries. Maybe it stops before there, but still, there is a tendency in that direction. There's still countries kicking in this case. And the second, again, Sweden. In 1979 was the first country to also outlaw corporal punishment by parents. So in 1965 in Sweden, parents were not allowed to use corporal punishment as an educational tool in the raising their own children. This became illegal. And Norway followed suit. So Sweden was the innovator here, as Poland was the innovator in school, Sweden was the innovator when it came to corporal punishment by parents. Norway followed suit in the 1980s. We, generally speaking, Norway tend to adapt Swedish laws about 5 to 10 years after Sweden. So we are sort of we know we follow the lead. We are sort of an early adapter, but we're not an innovator in this field. And the Czech Republic, of course, also has, no, actually they haven't. But by now there are 44 countries, mainly European or Latin American, who have outlawed corporal punishment by parents, and also New Zealand, actually. 44 countries and counting. Most of these countries came in the 1900s, so most of them are very recent adapters. We know from our experience that one thing is to pass the law. And when we pass this law, then we talk about this is symbolic policy. Yeah, there are some do-gooders who, no, maybe I shouldn't be so leisurely about what I'm saying, but let me rephrase that. They pass these laws, but they don't necessarily stick to begin with. There might be elements of symbolic policy if you have a short time perspective. However, I can see in my own country that as time goes by, and now it's 30 years since we banned corporal punishment on children, as time goes by, this sort of settles in in different ways. It becomes sort of part of the implementation. It takes decades, but there is certainly more bite in this law now than it was when we passed it in the 1980s. The Czech Republic is one of the few countries who haven't banned corporal punishment in total, but you know, you have, I admit that I've just glanced on the internet, on the Wikipedia on the Czech Republic, and we all know that Wikipedia can be unreliable. But it seems that you have something similar to the UK system, where if corporal punishment leaves visible marks on the child, sort of as a rule of thumb, then you know there is a reaction by the child protection authorities. But again, there might be, you know, if this is a sort of tricky process, it's sort of interesting to see that the countries who start this seems to be Protestant northern countries. It seems to be Scandinavia and the United States and Canada that is sort of innovative and early adapters. And this made me think, you know, I should go back to Durkheim again and Paul's lecture tomorrow. Durkheim also had this idea that Protestantism is sort of the most individualized theology of the Christian faith. So that's where individuation sort of first comes in a strong way, comes in Protestant countries. But then eventually it diffuses also to other parts of the world. This is an hypothesis. Nobody has rejected it. It would be a fascinating thing to write about, actually. I haven't, but you know, for students, some of you might be looking for a PhD project. I think there is stuff to do here that is interesting. I just now launched this as a hypothesis, and hey, it really has classical credentials, you know, all the way back to Durkheim. You can't get more classical than that if you're a sociologist. Okay. Yet another example of this diffusion, and this is actually almost total diffusion of a political document. The Convention on the Rights of the Child, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. It was made in 1989. Already the next year, it was ratified by 60 countries. Norway ratified in 1991, and the Czech Republic in 1993. In 1915, Somalia also ratified as the last country to ratify, except for the United States. Actually, all countries in the United Nations system have now ratified this convention, meaning that they consider it law, except the United States. The United States is a little bit peculiar, though, because actually the Convention on the Rights of the Child was inspired by UN, United Nations legislation. That was actually their laws that were adopted. So it's a little bit backwards. They're the only country that hasn't ratified it. It has to do more with general reluctance of American countries, US lately, to bind themselves to international agreements where they don't really know where it's going to head, you know. But for practical purposes, the United Nations, the USA has the same legislation. It's just that they haven't signed the convention, but actually it is their legislation, basically. And the main point, so this is total diffusion. Everybody's total, and it's the most rapid ratification of a UN treaty in the history of the United Nations. So it seems, you know, this might be an idea whose time has come. And I think Bertrand Russell said that nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. The main tenets of this convention is the following. The first is the right to be heard by the child in all issues pertaining to the child. The right to non-discrimination. The right to life and development. And finally, this is important in this context, that a primary consideration in all policy measures related to children should be the best interest of the child. This is on the trump card. If you can argue that something is in the best interest of the child, it trumps everything else when it comes to policy. And therefore it becomes extremely important what is the best interest of the child. And that is about culture, right? But it might also be about this individuation process going on. In this case, the child as an individual. Let me now move, now I've done what I tried to do, claim importance. Now, this is an important policy field. It's not only in Norway, we're dealing with something, we have the tail of something big here. The tail might be Norway, but what we're looking at is much bigger. But now let me look more detail at the tail at Norway. Now how do we implement this? This is a ratification of a treaty. We have incorporated it in our national legislation. And we have 4 principles in child protection in Norway, which the Child Protection Agency and and so on have to follow. The first is all public intervention should be in the best interest of the child. The second is when intervening, the mildest effective intervention should be used. Please notice that mildest and effective are both important here. It should be the mildest if it is effective. But it shouldn't be the mildest if the very mildest thing is ineffective. So we get into the discussion, what do you mean by effective? Effective in what sense? And it is effective related to best interest of the child, because this is overreaching, this is the trump card. The second is, unless there are reasons to assume otherwise, it is in the best interest of the child to grow up with, or at least have a regular contact with its biological parents or parents. So that means that the one who argues that the child should not be with the parents is the one who has the burden of proof. The default is that the child is with the family. If you think otherwise, you must give reasons for it. And the reasons must be because it is in the best interest of the child. And the same comes when it comes if you have a situation where the child has been removed from the parents and is raised somewhere else in a foster home, usually in Norway. The issue is, should then the biological parents have contact with the child after, for instance, after a sexual abuse case? Should still the parents have contact with the child, have regular visits and so on? And as a general rule, yes, they should. It's only if you can argue that it is not in the best interest of the child that you can deny or limit contact between the biological parent and the child after the child has been taken out of the family home. So the burden of proof again is among those who will, not do that. The final principle is that the child should be informed and heard concerning interventions. What this means can also is rather important. Does it mean that it should always be informed about its own case? Well, no, not if it can be argued that it is in the best interest of the child not to be informed. There might be cases like that, but again, for instance, it's a 6-year-old child, will that sort of understand this at all? We have this rule of thumb in the old days that when the child was 12 years old, then at least it should be informed and be heard and have opinions that you should listen to. But you didn't have to decide on behalf of that, but they should be listened to. Now in the new directions, we have moved that down to 7 years. But there are possibilities not to inform and hear the opinion of the child. This is about what we call professional discretion in English, which means that the social workers have room for thinking about what is the good thing to do here with regard to the child. So, but this is still the guiding principle, right? I would be puzzled if this is very different in the Czech Republic. But it's an empirical question. But I would be puzzled if this is different in the Czech Republic, or actually in any European country. Then, now we go into the nitty-gritties, right? We go sort of from the general to the more specific all the time. Can you see this? There's too much light. So I'll take you through, I call it child protection in between the mother, the father, and the state. And this is a classical, I'm a political scientist. This is the classical way to show the policy implementation process from political scientists. If anyway do this kind of applied social science research. By the way, I spent 20 years in applied social science research before I came to Oslo University College to teach. So this is, the traditional way we present the policy making process, not in order to, make it pedagogically easy to see where different things belong. In practice, the policy implementation process is much more messy, but still, this is sort of an ideal type sort of presentation, to use Max Weber's old concept here of the policy implementation process. So, who are the political authorities in Norway? Well, at the moment, these are these people. In October 2003, we got a new center-right government, or actually a very right government, consisting of Erna Solberg, the leader of the Conservative Party and now our Prime Minister, and her sort of alliance partner, Siv Jensen, who is the leader of the Progress Party, which is sort of a neoliberal, fairly right-wing type of party. They have, there are 18 ministers, 9 women and 9 men. There is a lot of old tradition in Norway, going back to Gro Harlem Brundtland's days in the 1980s, that women are very strongly represented in our political system. In the 1980s, Gro Harlem Brundtland, as some of you may know, she was the leader of the World Health Organization for a few years. Not only was she a woman leading the Labour Party, but the leaders of the two of the main opposition parties, the Conservatives and the Grelians, were also women. But they are in charge. They lead a minority government. In order to rule, they need the consent of at least one more party, and there are 2 sort of support parties who control what we call the crossover vote, and that's the Liberal Party, small Liberal Party. It's similar to the German Liberal Party in a sense, and the Christian People's Party, which is sort of a Christian Democratic Party, only sort of Protestant-based rather than Catholic-based, but it's rather similar. They control the crossover vote. And we have this saying in Norway that in politics, as in marriage, the power belongs to the one who has another place to go. So, the center parties, they have another place to go. They can align themselves with the large Social Democratic Party and the small left-wing party and the even smaller Green Party. So they are in a good bargaining position. While the Socialist Left Party, for instance, they have no bargaining strength because they cannot. And actually, anyway, I won't go into general political science. But although this is a very right government in the Norwegian context of right and not right, the power is really very strongly vested in the center parties, including the Green Party, who the last years have been with the Social Democrats. However, when it comes to this child policy, for instance, the ratification of the UN Convention, there has been political consensus. This is not a politicized theme in Norway. If anything, I would say there is a lot of consensus about the general principles here. There is not politicized along the left-right axis. Christian People's Party also is in on this, and so on and so on. So it's a lot of consensus in this policy area. Laws and regulations. Very important is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. We have a bunch of other laws concerning the children. The one important in this context is the Child Protection Act, Barnevernsloven, the Child Protection Act of 1992, came in the year after we ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. But Child Protection Acts go back they have a long history in Norway. Actually, we were the first country in the world to introduce a Child Protection Act. Very different from this one, it must be said, in 1896 already. But now, I believe all countries have, at least all European and American countries have Child Protection Acts, have been for a long time. And ours is very much sort of modeled on this one, since we first ratified this and then we put this one in. There's a case, as I said, there's a case pending these days about a Czech mother whose children was taken from the family home, or eventually from the kindergartens where the children were, without their prior consent, and it might have come as a bolt out of the blue. Might have done. At least in so many of these cases, it comes as a bolt out of the blue for the parents. So I'm going to go particularly into paragraph 412 in the Child Protection Act, which regulates under which circumstances you can take over the custody for the child. And this relates to the legal system that all these cases, and it's not only the Czech case, most of these cases are native Norwegian cases, because most of those who are in this situation are native Norwegians and their children. But this paragraph 412 is the important one. It's my own translation, so I haven't checked it with our legal experts. But I think, I just mentioned that if you should blog on this, that is my own translation. First, you can, and again, if there is serious deficiencies in the daily care that the child receives, or serious deficiencies related to the personal contact and safety that the child needs relative to its age and development, then you can have a decision to take over the custody of the child. Now we're talking law. I don't know if there are law students here, but if you study law, you know that every word means something different from sociology, actually, or political science, where we concepts here and what does it really mean. We don't agree anyway, right? On concepts. In law, every word means something. So please notice it says if there are deficiencies in the daily care, or if there are deficiencies related to the personal contact and safety, then you can do nothing. It must be serious deficiencies. And the law is going to what does serious deficiencies mean. And we have a lot of legal discussions on that, and Supreme Court decisions, and all the legal stuff. But this is, so it's serious. Second, if the parents do not ensure that the sick, disabled, or in need of special care child is provided with special needs related to treatment and education. For instance, let's say that the child has kidney failure, but the parents do not take the child to dialysis, so the child will die unless because for religious or whatever reasons they don't want to treat the child. Then you can take the child, to save the child, because it's in the best interest of the child. That's the thing. Third, if the child is abused or is subject to other serious violations in the home, and abuse relates mainly to sexual abuse, but it can also be other types of abuse. But abuse is a very strong word. Mishandlet in Norwegian is also a very strong word. So it is parallel to, it can be violations, that's okay, but not serious violations. And finally, if it is highly probable that the health or the development of the child will be seriously damaged because the parents are unable to take sufficient responsibility for the child. Again, it's not enough that it is probable, it must be highly probable. And it's not enough that the child will be damaged, it must be seriously damaged. Then you can go in and take custody of the child. And then there is an important add-on here. A decision taking after A, that's this one, can only be made when it is necessary in the situation the child is in. And here comes the very important point. Such a decision can therefore not be made if one can create satisfactory conditions for the child by helping measures after paragraph 4.4 or by measures after paragraph 4.10 and 4.11. These specify a lot of measures like free kindergarten, like counseling, like giving money, having a visit home that the children can go to, all this kind of thing that the parents must agree to, and it's only if all that stuff doesn't work that you can take the child. Which basically means that in this case, the decision to take over the care of the child doesn't come as a bolt out of the blue for the parents, because they know that something is cooking, because the child authorities are on the knocking on the door, and hey, we had this message from measures of worries from the kindergartens, this written or other measures, other communication from the school or the kindergarten or the health station or what have you. And we wonder if we can talk about the situation, and maybe we have some measures, counseling, if we agree on that, blah, 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 right. So then it doesn't come out of the blue. And if these are situations where the child is not permanently in Norway, then usually what happens is that the parents, they run away with the child. So it doesn't happen often anyway. But you know, so what I'm driving at that is these three that are. This is where you can actually intervene without having consultative talks with the child, with the parents first. And this is because, you know, the child is seriously endangered right now, and if you wait, something terrible can happen. So then, you know, and if you then start with voluntary kind of stuff, then it might be too late, you know, because it will usually take months with voluntary stuff before you go in after paragraph 412A. So this is the type of cases that are and these are then the main cases where Norway is criticized internationally, and where we have, to put it mildly, a rather lively internal debate also, because most children who are taken after this are native Norwegian people, native Norwegian children and native Norwegian parents. I mentioned to start with that there is this prohibition about corporal punishment in children. It is illegal in Norway to corporally punish a child. It's also illegal to threaten to use corporal punishment, actually. So we have as an educational tool. And also, if the child is exposed to the parents being violent against towards his other. Mentioned first, the man beats the wife and the child sees it. Then this also counts as using violence against the child, because it installed fear in the child, right? However, this does not mean that using violence against your children is considered a serious violation. Okay? This is a violation, it's not a serious violation. So children will not be taken from their parents because they have slapped the child, or spanked it or whatever, even if they do it fairly regularly, because it's a violation, but not a serious violation. So, but what will happen is that if message of concerns is released from the kindergartens, that the child says, I'm beaten at home and so on, then the child protection agency might intervene, and after this, and then offer counseling, and let's talk about Norwegian law and so on, so on, so on. I don't know if it's with you, but some of our citizens have some problems, in particular from some of the immigrant countries perhaps, but not only from immigrant countries, that they have to go to the child protection office, which is 85% of those working there are women. If you're a male yourself, let's say you're a male from Afghanistan, for instance, and you have to listen to this woman telling you how you should raise your child, and what is permitted and not permitted when it comes to child raising in Norway. You can imagine, if you're an anthropologist or a sociologist, that this can be a rather special type of interaction. And it's interesting also in the sense that the men and the women will know that if I don't show up, or if I don't sort of at least show some kind of interest in what she's telling, there is the possibility that this will lead in a situation towards child takeover. Doesn't have to be probable, but there will also be a certain possibility there, which also adds to this. Social protection agency people are helpers, but they are also controllers in a sense, which goes for social work more generally. But in this particular context, I really think there are lots of master and PhD work that can be done. The only problem, of course, is all of these talks are confidential, So it really is extremely difficult to create and study this kind of stuff. You must have the consent of all parties and so on and so on. But we have some studies. Okay, inputs. How about with time, Thomas? I am probably over time already.
I still have 25 minutes.
Have we been going for 25 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's better than I thought. Yeah. Okay, inputs. What do I mean by inputs? By inputs, I mean what are the resources that public authorities have made available in order to enforce the laws. In many countries, you pass a law, but it's just a paper law. Now, in order to be implemented, you must put some resources at disposal for implementing the law. And what has happened in Norway, particularly since 1992, is a massive build-up of implementation of the resources available for social workers working in this field. This probably is part of the explanation why we have all these cases that are now coming in. We have simply prioritized this field. The politicians have made it a priority, put a lot of resources here since 1992. First of all, there is the Public Child Protection Agency, or the Barnevernet, as we say in Norway. It's a local government agency with state supervision, and we have 428 local governments. So, who works in the Child Protection Agency does not work for the state. They work for the municipality. The municipalities are, local governments are elected. Many of these local governments are controlled by the Social Democrats or the Socialist Left Party or the Agrarians, which perhaps make it even less likely that our government, conservative government, should have issued a secret directive to steal the children because when these 3,500 employees receives this secret directive, it's asked them to violate Norwegian law. The government said then assume that none of them go to their employer, which often is the opposition party, and said, do you know the strangest thing I got from our government? Have you seen this directive? And you can think of what a godsend this would be for an opposition party to be seen that the governing party are doing something. There's Heinrich Himmler kind of stuff in there. And think of the journalists, when they don't get the front teeth to be able to reveal this kind of scoop. They will have instant fame among the journalists. They will get the Scoop Prize, which is the very most prestigious prize in journalists can have in Norway. And they don't have to fear that the state will sack them because they are employed by the municipalities, not by the state. So they're protected by the opposition parties. There are 3.1 employees per 1,000 child aged 0 to 17. So it's quite a lot. In 1991, there are about, this is quoting from memory, so I think there was about 2,200 in 1992, but I will have to check that if you should quote it. But there's a massive build-up, right? Now it's 3,500. 80% are social workers, 85% are women. We have a special bachelor degree also in my university college. Particularly, you can do general social work as a bachelor, or you can do child protection work as a bachelor. And it's about 50-50 who do the child protection route or the general social work. I think we're unique on having a particular social worker education, particularly geared only to child protection. And this also shows the emphasis that the political authorities have put on this field. We need this particular bachelor on this extremely sensitive and difficult field. And it's so sensitive and difficult, we must have real professionals. We've got to have a separate bachelor on this. There is a very high turnover. Almost 30% of those working change employer every year. So there's a massive turnover. Which also means, incidentally, if this is a conspiracy, the conspiracy government must each year issue a new secret directive to the new incoming 30% of social workers who are working in this business, and cross their fingers that none of them will be a whistleblower vis-a-vis the press or their employer, which is the local government. They provide several voluntary interventions, but in acute cases also temporary placement outside the home without parental consent. But this is not the one who make the important decisions. The important decision making in case of interventions without parental consent, including placement outside the home, are not the Child Protection Agency. So all the bloggers, saying let's I noticed there's a blogger in Pilsen who has said, let's send the Czech commandos to Norway and kill barnevernet and then bring our children home. Quoting from memory here. He has got the wrong guys, you know. It's not barnevernet that he should go after. It should be the 12 regional county boards, because they are the ones who make the decisions. So it's sort of easier. You don't have to kill 3,500. It's enough to kill the people in these 12 regional county boards. There are 5 sort of judges. At least one of them must be trained as a lawyer. Who make these decisions. So these prepare cases, but these make the decisions. These are, you know, they work like law, like regular courts in many ways. But we have these separate county boards because if these cases should go to the regular courts, it takes a lot of time. Yeah. There's a queue and on regular courts. And when it comes to having taken children away from the parents, time is of the essence. So we got to move fast to get a decision so the child can get into sort of a safe new surrounding. We can't wait years, which it might take here. So we've done it in order to make it happen faster. Actually, Norway has the same legal tradition as Great Britain and and the USA, which is that we have general courts, so you know district courts that deal with all kind of complaints, labor issues, civil, family law, whatever. Unlike the German tradition, which my hunch is that Czech is close to the German tradition, which is that you have a separate court for legal disputes, a separate court for family issues, a separate court for every civil servant kind of stuff and so on, right? Yeah. But we have a sort of, like the British and the Danes and the Americans have sort of a general court. This, in a sense, is sneaking in elements of the German tradition. Because in many ways, these county boards, they deal only with child protection issues. They specialize on that. So it's a little bit similar to the German idea of having a court that is separate for this particular type of issues. And I've seen some blogger, I think actually it was a lawyer, arguing that what he really wanted to do was abolish this kind, not abolish this, but abolish this kind of stuff. The problem with abolishing that is that it will probably jeopardize the families even more, because then you have to move into the general system, then it takes much longer time, and these are not specialists in these very difficult issues. So the idea is that it's the only instance where we have something very similar to a court for a particular issue. And I believe they can give a good argument that it would be worse for children and families if Public Child Protection Agency could take children away from parents on behalf of the child is in immediate danger, and then we have to wait perhaps more than a year before the case comes into the legal system. That would mean actually that would make the much more powerful, because then you can make a temporary decision, and it can go so long before the case reaches the court that the court will sort of scratch their head and say, well, maybe the Child Protection Agency did something wrong, but now the child has been in the new family for, let's say, 2 years, and then something happens. Then thinking is it then in the best interest of the child to be reunited with the biological family? There's a saying from Icelandic law that you often do new injustice when you try to right wrong injustice. So the argument might be that even if they had made a mistake, the child has now been especially this young child, has now been so long with the new family that it would be not in the best interest of the child to be moved back. And that trumps eventually wrongdoing on behalf of one another. So it's important that these decisions are made pretty fast. And that's why we have a special court for this. The procedure in an acute temporary placement outside the home. I focus on that because that's what the Czech debate is about, and that is what basically most of this. That's the most controversial part. what happens? This is Child Protection Agency. A message of concern is received by the Child Protection Agency. Might be from, as I said, from the kindergarten, from the school. Might also be from the neighbors, or whoever, or perhaps relatives. Sometimes it's from relatives or friends. The agency then decides to start an investigation or not. They disregard quite a lot of these messages because, you know, some neighbors hate each other and they like nothing more than to make trouble for other neighbors. So we know they use their best discretion. It must be said, though, as a parenthesis, that there are two major criticisms of Child Protection Agency. One is from parents who say the agency took my child just because, for instance, they didn't think I had enough eye contact with the child. You know, that's that kind of criticism. The other criticism is from children who have grown up and said, you know, I was abused and the Child Protection Agency slept. They got tons of messages of concern that they disregarded them. So that's the other type of blogs we have in Norway. It's from children who accuse the Child Protection Agency of not seeing them and taking them seriously and see what happened to me. And they can sue the state, and they sometimes do for that, because that's wrongdoing on behalf of the state. They didn't take it seriously. The agency started an investigation. The investigation uncovers abuse or serious violations. The care agency decides and then it instigates temporary acute placement. They don't have to ask the county board because time is of the essence here. They go and take the child. However, then the county board must be informed immediately if they're doing this about the decision. And a provisional acceptance is issued by the board. And sometimes they don't give the provisional acceptance, and then the Child Protection Agency must give the child back again. But usually, if that's happened, the board says okay, and then you have 6 weeks for the child care agency to file to the board for a regular acceptance. Okay. This is the 6 weeks when they can gather evidence if they don't have evidence beforehand. There's maximum 6 weeks to gather evidence. That will be sufficient for the board to convince the board. The county board, following a legal procedure similar to the ordinary courts, reaches a decision on future temporary or permanent placement outside the home or not. Actually, there's written wrong here. Future temporary placement, it's never permanent placement. If the argument is that, so you know, I've written wrong here. If the parents have got the decision against them, they have a waiting period for 12 months, and then they can apply to the board to get the child back. So there's a waiting period of 12 months, but then they can apply again. Also, in this case, the parents are represented, and usually the parents get a lawyer, and the lawyer is paid for by the state. So the state pays for the lawyers of the parents. Don't want to make this easy for the Child Protection Agency. And if this goes against the parents can then appeal the case to the ordinary courts, and all the way to the Supreme Court. And the state pays for the lawyer all the way. So if you're a lawyer, this is a great place to get money. Because they're going to pay whatever it takes. This is part of the protection of the individuals. 5 minutes? Yeah, okay. Suddenly I jumped ahead. Yeah, threshold with assessments when placing children outside their home, sexual abuse, serious psychological, emotional, or material violations, serious practical, emotional, physical neglect, high risk of future serious damage. But there's a particular problem here. I think you must have it in the Czech Republic as well. On the one hand, the Child Protection Agency should not intervene before it's highly probable that the child is in jeopardy, right? On the other hand, it shouldn't wait so long that serious damage has already taken place. So this creates a dilemma. You would like to wait some more. Maybe, if you really can show that the child is raped, you wait one more. If it gets raped, that week, and then we have physical evidence, then we have a very strong case. On the other hand, if you wait to be certain, absolutely certain, now something happened that we really have hard evidence, then the serious damage may already have taken place. So this is the very difficult way of thinking that you have to think in the Child Protection Agency. And you have to find a balance here. And you can always discuss if the balance is right. And my hunch is this must be exactly similar in the Czech Republic. My hunch would be that. I don't know. You tell me. Rules of complaint, they can then appeal the decision in the regular courts, as I said. They get paid the lawyer on the way. And then assessment for returning custody to biological parent or parents. There is also something about how much must the situation have improved in the family in order to get the child back. And the argument here is that it must not only be probable that the biological parents have sort of got their acts together, but it must be highly probable that the parents have got their acts together. Again, it's rather strong actually to get the child back. If there's a child abuse case, I think it will be very difficult to argue that, you know, that, let's say, usually there's a stepfather who has abused the child. It's more often stepfathers than fathers. And it can be difficult to say, yeah, I'm a changed person now, I'm very different. Yeah, right, you would say that, wouldn't you? But can we be sure that it's highly probable that you are a changed man or not? And if it's not highly probable, then they will not give the child back. The principle of professional confidentiality. All personnel working in the field of child protection must observe professional confidentiality. And this has to do with general rule of law issues. You know, you should be able to say stuff, and sensitive information about you in a court proceeding should not be used as a weapon against you by the government in a later conflict. So that's why we hear nothing from the Child Protection Agency about these cases, including the case now pending in the Czech Republic. They will say nothing. And if there might, however, be the case that the parents want all information to be made public, and they specify say that we want all information to be made public. First thing to say is that the county governor's office of the ministry thinks that it is not in the interest of the child to get all this sensitive information about the child out on the internet forever for the child. Then they will say, okay, you say that, but still, you know, in the interest of the child, we will not reveal this information to the public. And please also notice that it's not enough if one parent wanted to be made public. Both parents, if there are more than one parent involved in the case, must give the consent both the mother and the father. It's not enough that say only the father or the mother wants to. Must be both of them. However, the parents can, if they want to, if the parents have all, and the lawyer have all the documents, usually all the documents. So they can make them public if they want to. However, I know no case, thank God, I would actually add here, normatively speaking, that parents have scanned these documents and put them on the internet, because hopefully the parents also think the same way. Is this a good thing for my child, that this information will be there for the rest of their life? Don't think so. I hope all parents think the same. Although it must be terribly bitter in a sense. But they can if they want to. Outputs. Can I go on a few more minutes?
Yeah, okay.
Just run through. There are 53,198 children of youth aged from 0 to 22 received interventions in 2012. More than 40,000 were born in Norway with native parents. 40 per thousand of children in Norway were sort of ethnic Norwegians, had the child with interventions. Bit over 5,000 born in Norway with immigrant parents, 50 per thousand, and a little bit more 7,000 of those born outside Norway, which is much, you see it's higher here. These are all type of interventions, but however, 83% of interventions did not involve placing children away from home without the consent of parents. 83% are with the consent of parents. And usually counseling, visit homes, economic support, free kindergartens, and so on. When it comes to paragraph 412, taking from the children, from their parents without consent, there were 13,798 children placed outside the parental home. In 1992, there were 4,000. So, you know, there's been a build-up here related to the enormous amount of new resources put in here. Foster parent placement is the most usual, 9,000. Child institution, 1,000. Own apartment, 2,000. And other also sort of own apartment. If it's youth, then they tend to be own apartments. You know. Youth don't need a new family. They need just to have a family. They just need to get away from their old family for reasons of extreme violence or some other things. And this is something also that will be interesting to check in the Czech Republic. I think you use institutions much more than we do. There's been a general tendency in social policy in Norway towards what they call deinstitutionalization and mainstreaming and normalization, which means that we have taken down big institutions. We have done in elderly care, in psychiatric care, in mental, born disabled. Special schools have been dismantled, except schools for the deaf. They have wanted to keep the special schools. Because we think that, normalization, integration is the better for the child. Maybe we are overdoing it. We have a discussion here if we are overdoing it. The new institutions are really not like the old, or terrible institutions of the 1950s and 60s. Maybe we're overdoing it. I will be interested in, innovative solutions when it comes to different type of institutions as an alternative to foster parent placement. That we use foster parent placement more because of this, and there's strong tendency in this direction. Well, the foster parent placement, 8,000 born in Norway, 6.5 per thousand, or 0.6% were placed in foster home by ethnic Norwegians, if you want to. 523 born in Norway with immigrant parents, and 837 born outside of Norway. Higher. These are, to a large extent, refugee immigration of children. And here is also, we see there is a major difference between children coming as refugees and children coming as family reunion. In the case of family reunion, there is a much lower percentage who are with interventions. But children coming from Chechnya, for instance, most of our Russians come from the Chechnya as refugees. They have a civil war going on. It does something with children and their parents, and need of counseling might be there for that kind of reason. Afghanistan, Somalia, Iraq are also very high. They are much higher actually than Russia. Those are the three, they're really high. And all of them have been war-torn for decades. It does something with the relationship between children and parents and the tolerance of violence generally. Approximately 20% of placement were with parental consent. I can say more about this, but I see Thomas now is looking very. Now I must speed up a little bit here, and I get it. I must just say one or two more words.
No, I think that your presentation finished by very interesting maps. It could be very interesting.
So thank you. So I love to go down all the way to show you these maps. Yeah. As a researcher, what is really challenging here is, outputs, that's what we do. Okay? But is this better for the children? That's the 1,000 kroner question. That's the output. Do the children get better? And then, the challenge to provide evidence-based knowledge that, taking the child, putting it in a foster place would be better than having it with the parents or eventually using an institution. Ideally, we should have controlled experiments. I think so. Ideally, we should have that. But we cannot, for ethical reasons, have controlled experiments on placing some children in foster homes, but others, let them stay with the family and let's just check it, go 20 years, and then we check, did this person commit suicide but not this person? Then we now have real evidence that, but we cannot do that, obviously. But this means that we will never be sure. We can never be sure that what we're doing is the right thing. And we have to live with that. So this is decision-making under uncertainty, with enormously consequences both for children and parents. And that's the situation we're in. We have stuff like this, who shows, all things considered, I am satisfied where I live now. If you're in a foster home, 60% answers agree to a large extent, I'm better now than I was. But if you're in an institution, then you know it's much fewer that are satisfied and much more people who disagree to a large extent. They think it's terrible to be in an institution. I would prefer to have been in a family home. We use this as argument. Some use this as arguments and saying that foster homes is better than institutions. So it might be interesting in a Czech context. However, the problem is there are selection effects here. Those who come to foster homes, they tend to be well-functioning kids. Those who are given up also by the foster homes, they tend to go to institutions. So you know there is a selection effect here. There is also an age effect. These institutions tend to be young people, and 13 and above, and then teenagers are more willing perhaps to express dissatisfaction than young people who, I sort of agree with this. So it's very difficult to get really good data about is institutional care better than foster care, and how about adoption as a possibility. There are very few adoptions. 37 foster parents were adopted in 2010, 27, and it's been about 20 for a long time. So have no fear, adoption is not used in Norway to this group. It's just very marginal cases. However, there are those who argue that it seems that adopted children do much better than foster home children, and they do much better than institutional children. And argue maybe we should change the laws into allowing more adoptions. My point as a researcher would be that, yeah, maybe so. The argument is that once you have adopted a child, then it's your child. You cannot exit. You cannot have an ex-child if you are adopted. But in a foster parent home, you can have an ex-child. You can say, I can't do this anymore. You have to take the child somewhere else. So we get instability in foster homes. We don't get it with adoptions. So that's a good argument. You know, the parents will sort of invest more in the child if it's really, you know, adopted. However, there is also a selection effect. The 27 children that are adopted are probably the most well-functioning children in the first place, right? So it's very difficult to get information. This is the problem of stability. Turnover among employees in child institutions is about approximately 30% annually. So those who work in institutions, they change all the time. But don't about this in the Czech Republic. 17% of children in foster home had changed foster home at least once in 2012 alone. So there is also foster homes giving up. It must be said that in the 17% are also quite a lot of cases where actually it was deliberate that they had a temporary foster home before they got the other one. But what is the realistic counterfactual alternative? What would happen if you hadn't made this intervention but that intervention without able to control experiments in this enormously important field? It's a real problem. Lastly, impacts. And by impacts I mean what does the whole child protection system do for the relationship between the state and citizen in Norway? And probably interesting from you, what does it do to the relationship between state and minorities? And we know something about that, eh? All the blogs. Your president making statements. The Child Protection Agency does not have a very good reputation among many minorities. To some extent, it's because they don't understand the system. They don't understand. It's not the Child Protection Agency who make this forceful decision. It's the county boards. But of course, it matters quite a lot for the county boards what the Child Protection Agency thinks and means, right? Although the parents get their own lawyer. And here leads to the one you wanted me to show. This is, you know, Norwegian culture versus cultures elsewhere. There's something about, you know, the hegemonic ideas about how you should raise a child in Norway versus what's a hegemonic idea in other places. And this is from the World Value Survey. And on this axis is what they call traditional versus secular rationality values. These are surveys conducted in a lot of countries. And here they try to tap to which extent the respondents, what they answer to, for instance, questions like this. I'm going to read a list of various changes in our way of life that might take place in the near future. Please tell me if greater respect for authority, if greater respect for authority were to happen in our country, whether you think that would be a good thing or a bad thing. If you think that, you know, greater respect for authority would be a good thing in our society, then you score here, you have traditional values. Yeah. If you think that great respect for authority is not a good thing, then you score up here on rational values. The other axis, survival versus self-expression values, has something to do with your tolerance towards everybody express themselves. We can live in whatever way they want, for instance. And one of the question is, and this battery, please tell me whether you think homosexuality can always be justified or never be justified, or something in between. If you think it can always be justified, you're out here. If you think it can never be justified, you're down here. This is just two examples of a battery of questions. The interesting thing is that Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, they score very high on secular rational values. And so, does the Czech Republic. Here's the Czech Republic. There's also a question about belief in God. And apparently the Czechs and the Norwegians and Scandinavians similarly tend not to answer yes to that question. And you see that the Protestant Europe is sort of here. Baltic states are also very strong, Estonia, Lithuania, and also, Hong Kong. And Czech Republic is close to Slovenia and Hong Kong, actually. Very high on secular rational values. This has something to do with how you think children also should be brought up, right? Respect for authority, including then parental authority. The other axis, the interesting thing is that we score high also on the other axis. And here we are together with Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Great Britain. I mean, the English-speaking countries and Scandinavia are very high here, but not Catholic Europe, not so much the Czech Republic either, and certainly not Orthodox Europe, not to speak of African Islam. African Islamic countries are now here, down here. We are extreme up here. And this leads to the final point, also probably why we have these issues now also with the developer community. We have enormous immigration, because we're the only country in Europe, I guess, that did experience the 2009 crisis. Actually, we have a full employment economy and more. So, and we're the only one who don't have that. So, Swedes are coming in the thousands, a close neighbor. The Polish community is now the second largest after the Swedes. Pakistan is the third one. Poland is down here, by the way. And since 1991, the percentage of immigrants, new blood, if you like, in Norway has increased from about 5% till something like between 10 and 15%, depending on how you count. Enormous change in a very short time. And then they come with their ideas about how to raise a family and how we should be towards your children. They come to us, and then they suddenly experience that our child protection agency says, yes, you are different culture, we understand that, but does that mean that we have separate rules for you according to the rules in your country, or should we use the same rules as we have up here in our country? It's the contentious issue, multiculturalism. This is really when multiculturalism is confronted in a very way that really means something. Should social workers think, okay, it's from a different country, where perhaps also, some of these countries allow corporal punishment. You can also be, so you need to use the country that we don't have very many, Saudi Arabia, for instance. You can beat both your child and your wife, and that's okay. And there's also tend to be sometimes very sort of male-oriented cultures, right? And they come to us, and then these males will have to be called to meetings with our child protection agency, where sort of a social worker said, often young also, young woman, going to tell this hardened man that you cannot raise the child you think you can, because you're in Norway and we do things in this way. And subtext might be, and if you don't listen to me at all, we have other measures. Probably not said, but and usually it won't happen, I guess, but you can see the tensions here. And yeah. Wasn't that bad, Thomas? This is the end. This is the end. And if you take this thing, that's okay. But I would say this: if any of you want to blog or write anything related to what I've been saying, and if you want to double check what I've been saying, and eventually perhaps have some elaborations, feel free to send me an email. And I'll answer it, and if I'm in doubt, I'll also check with our legal experts. I'm not a lawyer, I'm a political scientist. I've tried to check all of this through with our department, with the legal experts in our department, to be sure I don't say anything wrong. But I can absolutely guarantee I'm not said something wrong. So if you can send me, if you write something, you don't have to, of course, but it's an extra service. You can send it to me. I'll check it also with the legal experts, so they're dead certain that you get what is actually the policy in Norway on these kind of cases. Final thing, I forgot to say that in all countries, and this is the Czech Republic, I'm certain about this, it's not the citizenship of the child that matters. It's your habitual residence. That's also the Hague Convention 1996. Norway has not ratified yet, but they're in the process of ratifying. The Czech Republic has ratified that, so that's Sweden, 2013. So that means that if I should go to the Czech Republic with my wife, and we got a child here in the Czech Republic, or eventually we took a newborn child with us to the Czech Republic, and the child, and we stayed there, and we had to work there, or we received social support there, and the child grew to 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and it was with us in Norway, perhaps in the Czech Republic. Perhaps I visited Norway a few times, but that was that is the habitual residence of that child. And that means that also in the Hague Convention, it's the Child Protection Agency and the laws in the country where your child is habitually resided that has the legal authority. So that means if I'm just on vacation in the Czech Republic, let's say for a couple of months, and I beat my child in a hotel room, and Czech authorities come and knock on my hotel room and say, we know what's going on, we take your child and so on. There's no, I'm not a habitual resident in the Czech Republic, I'm just visiting here. You must then send a message back home if you want to open this case to where I have a habitual residence, which is in Norway. And then, work like that. But if I've been here for some years, and it's obvious that my intent is actually to stay longer, then I can say, my passport is Norwegian, and my children's passport is Norwegian, so you have no jurisdiction over me here. It must, you must refer the case back to where these children have their passports. And they say, sorry, that's not how it works. If it was like that, in practice, then your children will be lawless, because the Norwegian Child Protection Agency, they don't have jurisdictions in the Czech Republic, they don't know what's going on. So, it must be the Czech authorities who can know what's going on. And the same way works the other way around. So if there are cases when people are sort of settled in Norway, regardless of the passport, then it's Norwegian law, just as if we settle in the Czech Republic, then it's Czech law. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for a very interesting introduction to the system of child protection in Norway. And we have some time for your question. If you are interested in some programs about the child protection system in Norway, you can ask Professor Einara.
And perhaps you have some reflections on the Czech child protection system. I would be intrigued to hear something about it. If this is extremely different in the Czech case. If somebody wants to think that.
I have a couple of questions, but I want to leave the space for perhaps students, because I believe there will be some more space for discussions. I can wait.
No, you can ask.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It was really interesting, and it was interesting to hear that actually Norway is in some ways quite similar to Czech Republic. Like, I really think that it's important to compare paternalism of the state between those two countries. And, but the case of the Czech Republic, and perhaps why the case that is discussed in media is so problematic, is that in the Czech Republic, paternalism of the state is really perceived as a problem, as a socialist legacy. Because Czechoslovakia was implemented the policies that intervened into the family and that had to basically secure that the families are in line with the ideology. Everything, any intervention in the post-socialist period is considered as highly problematic. And there is this, I would say, like civic worries about any interventions in the family, and it's related to the discourse of the civil rights in the post-socialist discourse. So I think, and that's definitely the difference. But I wonder more about, if you could say perhaps a little bit more. I'm kind of puzzled by the map that you showed us, because I'm quite confused how it happened that the state in Norway is paternalistic. If the values are secularly relational, and if the legal system is close to Great Britain, I feel like, because in the Czech Republic the legal system tries to be like the state, or the definitions of the legal system try to be liberal in a way that it tries to regulate the life as little as possible, but it doesn't say that I don't know, like beating kids is alright. But I mean, there are perhaps other ways how to solve this problem, and so I'm just thinking about, but I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how it happened that the state is basically behaving paternalistically in Norway.
Right. First of all, if there are other ways to do this, to secure the rights of children, I would love to hear it. And the best practice, because of course this exposes us to a lot of criticism, both by the native Norwegians and certainly from ethnic minorities and other countries. So this is not something Norwegian politicians are happy about, this press. But we haven't found a better way of doing it. So, to protect children, really protect them. So that might be something. I would be intrigued to hear about, how in the Czech Republic one solves the dilemma of secure an autonomous space for people. That's a liberal idea. But at the same time avoiding that some of the people will suppress some of the others. Because that in a sense is what is the case here. And I think there's a duality in liberalism here. One part of liberalism is that the state should stay away, let people be autonomous. And we actually, this dilemma is pointed out also in our commission reports here, that on one, this individuation and liberalism, and people should be allowed to do their own thing, that in a sense also means that how I raise my child is my business. My family is mine, stay away from it. And this is also a very strong movement. You should be allowed to raise your children in a different way. For instance, I don't know, in the Czech Republic we have same-sex marriages, and they can have children in different ways. And the point is that, and they should, the state has nothing, shouldn't say that one type of family is the right family. If I choose to live with another man and raise a child, or if I'm a woman, I raise a child to live with another woman, and I do it however I want to. And if I want to teach them New Age stuff, I do that. If I want to teach them something else, I do deep level Christianity or fundamental religion, I do that, and don't. So that is very strong. But at the same time, don't you agree? No one knows these things, so this is really fascinating moral philosophical issue. At the same time, there's also this strong tenet of liberalism, which is also in the United Nations conventions, that the state should work to protect citizens against arbitrary suppression and violence from other citizens. And it's also become much stronger. And here these two collide. Because if you want to then secure the autonomy of the child, it in some sense means you must limit the autonomy of other family members to do whatever they want to do with their child. And by us, we have sort of taken a stand here that among these two liberal principles, if they are in conflict, then the best interest of the child has preference over that everybody should be allowed to raise the child in whatever way they want. This is, legally speaking, a conflict between the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 8, which specified the right to privacy, the families to privacy, which is sort of very, avoid the old Soviet Union communist type of thing. And this comes in conflict with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, can come in conflict with that when, the child should have protection against violence from also family members. And we have fascinating legal stuff about this. I'm not an expert, but I've tried to read about it before I came here. That, we believe that European Convention Article 8 is reconcilable with putting the rights of the child first. That's a legal point of view. But in practice, this is a conflict between two goals that are very strong in our societies. The autonomy ideal is a hegemonic cultural idea, I think, in both our countries and indeed in more and more countries in the world. So, this we see as a social scientist, I think that makes it for an absolutely fascinating area to study. So I would recommend, if you are taking your PhDs, this is really, and if I'm right, this is going to be stronger in Europe in the future also. So hey, here you have work cut out, so fascinating. Perhaps you said something else also I should comment on, was it sort of...
No, but I'm sorry, I had another question. If you could say a little bit more about who are the key actors who enter the discourse around the child protection and child care.
The central actors, NGOs and so on, or feminist movement.
I'm sure, like in the Czech Republic, for example, quite doctors have really strong voice as concerns childcare. So I wonder if there are other experts in Norway who play the key role. I understood that social workers can be probably.
So there's some quite good moral philosophers who are also in the public debate here, because in a sense this is moral philosophy. There is, politically, I think there is what Rawls has called overlapping consensus in another context here. The liberal parties, including the right-wing liberal Progress Party, they sort of go into this idea about the autonomy of the child. That must trump other liberal issues. So there, the Conservative Party also is sort of, actually there is quite a strong feminist movement also inside the Conservative Party who also go for this, the rights of the child argument. Social Democrats have their type of arguments for this. Social Left Party, obviously, Liberal Party. So there is really no, it might be a problem that there is no one to debate against. There might be too much consensus, in a sense. It's, for instance, there are some who argue that multiculturalism arguments should be stronger. This has also been traditionally vis-a-vis our Sami minority. Sami is a minority who has been, reindeers herding in the farm, who have different educational practices historically. Some also argue there's a class dimension here. This sort of the ideal family here is very middle class family in a sense, the negotiating family, talk with the children, agree on them. So it's a sort of a working class bias here. Some argue that. You can overdo those kind of arguments. Some then argue that you stereotype working class culture, and you also use stereotype immigrant cultures, and this is also wrong. So we have a debate. We have some debate here, but probably because you don't share your state experience. Norway is one of the few countries in the world who, for 100 years, have not experienced the state as a suppressor. So we have never had a historical experience, except the German occupation in 1940-45, but that was foreigners coming in and taking over. Apart from that, we have no revolution in that sense, a bit consensus. Norwegian state is sort of a little pragmatic tool for doing stuff for the best. Which I experienced this firsthand when I went to Poland after the Wende, so that's what they called it, the Wende in 1989-92. We wanted to sell them the Norwegian approach to pensions. We had some contacts with fairly high-level Polish politicians, and we wanted to sell the Norwegian idea of universal pensions, not only for workers but for everybody. Also housewives should have their own pension. And if you're a resident, a citizen, again this autonomy argument, a citizen is enough, you don't have to work, so be a citizen. So we went there and they listened politely to us until we came to the point somebody raised their hand and said, yeah, okay, how is this paid for in Norway? It's paid for by the state, through taxes, It's the wonderful state who provides this pension. And then the Poles look at each other and they look at us and say, yes, thank you for this very interesting presentation of how the system works in Norway. Maybe I'm sort of, when we went after the meeting, I said, did this go well or not? I said, they might be on us until we say, you must rely on the state for this. Because at that point, there's something the Poles really didn't want was, to rely on the state for obvious reasons. And maybe I'm right that the historical experience here is. But we are peculiar nation. We are Norway and Sweden. Not so much Denmark, but Norway and Sweden have never had the state as an oppressor. Felt by today's political elite as an oppressor. And maybe we are naive. Maybe we're giving the state too much power. So maybe we're in for it in the future, but then again, maybe we're not.
One small reply on this, a very interesting question. On the Progress Party, which you described as a liberal party, but it's also more two-faced than that, right? In a way, I think this party will use this slogan on the best interest of the child to argue against multiculturalism, which the party is actually against, right?
That's true.
They're very strong opponent. They're not very friendly as immigrants, particularly not from Africa, sort of foreign cultures and so on. But I think that they're using the traditional Norwegian integrated perspective to say, hey, we know how to raise children. And these immigrants should learn that from us. Not pointing to people from Czech Republic or Poland or England or Sweden, of course not. They're good Europeans. But the tensions ones. That's a part of the discussion as well. I think it can be used in this way. You're not trusting all these immigrants group that they raise the child in the best way.
Okay, if I understand your argument well, your argument is about that, or interpretation that this system of child protection is like the way how to educate immigrant families, how to educate the children in immigrant families to obtain the manners and costumes which are very usual in Norway, majority system.
Well, my point now was sort of a political one. I think it would be in the future an even more important part of the political discussion. This child, how to raise the child to the best interest of the child, connected to multiculturalism. That's discussion will follow. And one of the two parties in government, this Progress Party, is really a two-faced party. Yes, we are liberal, but then again, we are not very traditionally Norwegian. You have this. Don't you agree with that? I don't know.
Yeah, you're probably right. I'm not sure how much they think about this. No one knows what goes on inside the party. You know, that goes for all the parties. But it might very well be. Sounds like a good hypothesis, certainly. And it also said that, you know, the liberal dilemma is something I heard. The liberal dilemma is that, you know, how liberal should you be towards those who are not liberal? You know, that's the problem with the liberalism, you know. You are liberal to everybody. Everybody can live their lives. But how about those who don't think everybody should live their lives as they will? Those who want, you should live this way, not another way. The problem is, you know, the liberals, by arguing that we are, in some sense, in this child protection era, the argument that everyone should be raised as fully autonomous individuals who should find their own way in life, and they should not be bullied by parents by choosing a particular path. They should be free to choose their gender role. They should be free to choose their political affiliation. They should be free to choose their religion, and they should be raised in such a way that when the age comes, they are able to, you know, make rational choices about, you know, how to live their lives. The problem is that is actually a very illiberal idea of, it's just one way then to raise your child, namely as a liberal individual. How about those who don't want to raise their children as liberal individuals, who are, you know, to enhance their capabilities in some sense? Because no, I want my child to think and act like I do, because otherwise that child will go to hell, and for instance, and so on. So this is a liberal dilemma, child rearing version of it, and there's not an easy way out of this. So I don't want to appear like sharing my own team all the way and saying, hey, look, it's fantastic we are. This is very difficult. And I'm political scientist, but not less as a citizen, so I'm very humble to, you know, do we do this the right thing? There's a lot of doubt about this. Maybe we sort of screw things up more than we actually help. This has something also to do with the fact that we can never have evidence-based knowledge about what's good here. So we have to feel our way and do the best we can. Maybe I should say I wouldn't overemphasize this argument about, you know, we have this particular state tradition and that makes us so peculiar and strange. Because after all, the tendency is the same in all countries. And more countries will ban corporal punishment of children, and so on. So this seems to be something more than just a peculiarity of our nation-building process in Norway and Sweden. But that might explain why we have tended to be early adapters here, you know. But I don't think this is only a peculiarity, the exotic tribes in the far north.
Okay, any question? So I have last question. If I understand well, this agency has strong autonomy. Well, for whom is responsible this agency? For the Norway government or?
Yeah, I guess I maybe I went too fast on that. They are employed by the municipalities. They are public employees employed by the municipal government, the local governments. There are 428 local governments, and they are employed by them. And they're responsible to them. And if they misconduct, if they do something wrong, they can also then be legally charged. Of course, they can. In the court system, the courts are independent. If they don't follow these procedures, for instance, if there's corruption, if, let's say, somebody takes money from some foster parent and to send them there, that will be, you know, it's illegal, of course. If it's found out, it will be, they will lose their job and they will go to jail for this. This is a very strong offense. I've never heard of a case like that. Never been. I don't think corruption. It's not not an issue here. I think it's not that much money from the foster parents either. Actually, it's so they are standard civil servants, if you want to employ them.
The second question, because you explained to us that the child has the right to be informed during this process about the problems of the children. Do you think that it's the space for the misusing and to start to manipulate with the children from the side of this people who are working in this agency?
Good question, very good question. I was thinking about that a lot myself. With the best of intention, the argument is that the child should be heard. One of the principles.
Yeah.
May that not mean in some cases that a social worker can influence what the child is saying? It's not going to be definitive in a case. It's just one aspect among many about the best interest of the child, what the child itself is stating. But there might be a possibility for manipulation here. This is about professional. It's about ethics, the ethics of the social workers. It can, for instance, be a problem that if there would be a case when perhaps child care authorities think it is not in the best interest of the child to have a lot of contact with the biological parents, but doesn't really have very strong arguments. This is very hypothetical, okay? But doesn't really have strong arguments that there's been child abuse here and the father is an alcoholic and the mother is a drug addict, and we don't have that kind of evidence. But if the child itself expresses that I don't want to see my mommy anymore, then that might be one of the aspects that will be emphasized when they discuss how much regular contact they should have with the parent, because they should have regular contact, but not if the best interest in the child is not to have. And if they say so themselves that they don't want it, well, it's not vital, but it will certainly push in that direction. And then if you're really perhaps a little bit paranoid, you can think that maybe it will then be tempting for a social worker, perhaps with the best of intentions, because I have all this knowledge, but it doesn't really hold up in court. But I can, if the child says this is something I can peddle to the deputy court and for strengthen my case. But it would be highly unethical if this is being done. If it's found out, he or she will lose the job immediately and be punished for it. But I can see that this again, the balancing thing. I since you mentioned it, that the child should be heard. It's less problematic perhaps, but if the child authorities should go in for voluntary arrangements, for instance, there is something called visiting homes, that the child go to a visiting home, which can be in order to get another contact and have some other to talk to. If it's a very isolated child, usually most of these cases are single mothers living with quite a lot of live with stepfathers. That's the typical case when this kind of thing happens. So but then, formally speaking, the child should be informed that the visiting home you're going to is something that these visiting parents are paid by the state to give you a sort of a visiting kind of thing, a place to visit. There are a lot of parents who might say yes to accepting a visiting home, but not if the child is told that this is a visiting home organized by the child protection agency, because that means that the child might tell the kids in the kindergarten, I have this visiting family and it's paid for by the state, something called barnevernet, and then these kids tell their parents, and then the leaks out to the local community that this family, the child protection agency is involved with this family, and that's unfortunately it's stigma connected to that. It shouldn't be, but there is stigma. So then the social worker will have this balancing thing. Should I tell the child, which I'm sort of supposed to do at least after age 7, or should I shut up? You can formally shut up because if you think, I'm thinking, you can say it's really in the best interest of the child not to know, and that trumps it. But you really must think about this. And we have studies who show that social workers often don't tell the children that, you know, the visiting home you're going to, and this nice person to come home to you and as your playmate, he or she is also really paid by the government. He seems to be a friend, but he's really paid by us. Yeah, so there are dilemmas and conflicts and balancing of worthy goals all the time. And probably, you know, would you say, going back to your point about the Czech Republic and this is, you know, appear like, you know, fall back to old Soviet days? I can certainly understand that Czech Republic, but also for you this must be a dilemma, right? It must be a dilemma because you want to make sure that children are not abused. So you have to balance it, but probably balance a different place than it does. But you have to balance it, don't you think?
To clarify, I didn't mean it like a critique. It was more like a point why
I
Czech society perceives any interventions of the state as problematic. It was definitely not a critique.
No, but not one. So I meant that as a critique of the Czech, not at all. But I was thinking that, in a sense, the price you pay, I would think so. The price you pay by then being certain that old Soviet type stuff is really away. The price you have to pay probably is that somewhat more children will then be abused without you finding out. So that's the price to pay. But you know, maybe don't, you know, to some extent it's a price we all pay. Also in Norway, we don't, you know, go full Mounty intervening, that we don't put cameras in the houses of old people to monitor what's going on inside there. If we really wanted to make sure that no child abuse takes place, we should now have cameras in all the rooms in all the houses in Norway monitoring what parents do with the children. Then we would get rid of child abuse. However, the price to pay would be too high. So we tolerate that some abuse and also some killings by children, by the parents will take place. Not many, but some. We tolerate that because, you know, the measures needed to stop that completely are the balance not the balance. You know. So we sacrifice some. We all do. All societies do. All societies sacrifice some children. Just a question of how many. For other goals that are also very worthy. Not least avoid